Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Before we start the meeting, we are not expecting a fire drill. So if the fire alarm goes off, please make your way to the nearest emergency exit and gather at the front of Runnymede Hall. Please switch your mobile phones to silent. I'd like to welcome you to this meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I am Councillor Grace Watson, the chair of the committee. Can I ask members to introduce themselves, starting from my left?
Hi everybody, Councillor Nick Harvey, North Ward, Canvey Islands.
Good evening, Councillor Sue Brooks, South Ward for Canvey Island.
Good evening, Councillor Carol Sage, Canvey Island, East Ward.
Good evening, Councillor Lorraine Britting, Canvey Island Central.
Good evening, Lorraine Larman, Councillor Lorraine Larman, Appleton Ward.
Good evening, Councillor Dave Thomas for Winter Gardens Ward, Canvey.
Evening all, Councillor Matt Cortez, Thundersley South Ward.
Good evening, Councillor Kieran Bowger, Tarpots Ward.
Good evening, Councillor Ben Wimbledon, Tarpots Ward.
Good evening, Councillor Nicola Benson, St George's Ward.
Good evening, Councillor Diana Jones, Appleton Ward.
We also have Cabinet Member for Housing attendant. If you'd like to introduce yourself, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening all. Councillor Rob Lillis, Cabinet Member for Health, Wellbeing and Housing.
Thank you. I would also... Oh, sorry. Councillor, I didn't see you up the back there. If you'd like to introduce yourself, please.
Councillor Amy Harbinson, and I'm just observing.
Thank you. My apologies. I would also like to welcome Dale Phillipson, the Independent Persons for Overview and Scrutiny Committee, who is joining us remotely this evening. The first item on the... Sorry? The first item on the...
Good evening. Good evening, Chair.
Sorry. It's all right, I'll wake up in a minute. Good evening, and thank you for attending. The first item on the agenda is item 1, apologies. Members, we've received apologies from Jenny Beaumont, Councillor Ainsley, Councillor Edwards and Councillor Knott. Are there any other apologies? No other apologies, thank you. Item 2, members' interest. Are there any members' interest to declare? No interest. Item 3, minutes. Members, the minutes of the meeting held on the 4th of June 2025 have been circulated. An amendment to the second paragraph in the Corporate Peer Challenge Action Plan Progress report should state assurance rather than insurance. With this change, are the minutes for the Overview and Scrutiny Committee held on the 4th of June 2025 agreed? Councillor Cortez.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick note on that. We asked about the Corporate Peer Challenge for us to have... It's worded as an internal audit process. What we were looking for was more just an update from each department to see how they were progressing, rather than sort of an audit. That was the only point on that. It's section 3, last paragraph.
Thank you, Councillor. Is that irrelevant? Okay. Councillor Cortez, could you provide a reference, please?
Page 3, it's the last section, last paragraph under the start of section 4 that says resolved. The section that says members expressed interest in the internal audit process.
Thank you, Councillor Cortez. That will be changed to internal audit update. Just an update.
Just update. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry. Are the minutes for the Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting held on the 4th of June 2025 agreed? Sorry. Item 4, Housing Improvement Programme update. Members, we have before us a report from the Assistant Director, Housing, Health and Partnerships, providing an update on the progress made to date against the core housing consumer standards and the critical work being undertaken to achieve this compliance. Councillor Lillis, as portfolio holder for health and wellbeing and housing, please introduce this report.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say a few words before Damien Geller, the Assistant Director, Housing, Health and Partnerships, takes you through the report before you this evening. Members, you'll be aware that I am the Chair of the Housing Improvement Programme Board that was set up to ensure that there was member oversight, to ensure that there was continual improvement in the housing service. Members of the board include myself as Chair, Councillor Kate Knott, who's a great help to me, as Vice Chair, Councillor Jamie Huntman, and both the Leader and Deputy Leader of the Council. The board met most recently on 26 June, during which, I think it's fair to say, there was robust challenge from members. Members, you'll also be aware that I give regular updates to Cabinet on the progress of the Housing Improvement Programme, the most recent of which was given on 18 June. During that meeting, I stated that, and I quote, "A housing service review has also taken place with a new structure designed." Members, my understanding from that sentence was that the service review had been completed. That is not the case. The HIP Board have since been informed that the end of September this year is being targeted for the completion of the service review. The report before you is the first of the quarterly reports that will be presented by Damien to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and I'm well aware that there's a lot of data before you this evening, so if something comes to mind after the meeting, before the next one, then please be assured that you can always raise it directly with myself and or with Damien. I'd like to thank you all who attended the recent HQN all-member training on housing or have since watched it online. The feedback that I received on that night was very positive indeed, and there were 23 members in attendance that evening, including myself and Councillor Kate Knott. On Friday this week, 4th July, I will attend this month's engagement meeting with the regulator of social housing. During the last meeting, I was asked to give an update as the chair of the HIP board. From my perspective, I certainly acknowledge the good work that those present in the meeting were carrying out, and I stated that there was clearly much still left to do, but I spoke in terms of the green shoots of recovery in the housing service that I believe are starting to emerge. I think I said something along the lines of us having reached base camp Everest, but still have the mountain before us to climb. And finally, a reminder to all that the most important people in all of this are our tenants and the quality of service that we provide to them. And we must never lose sight of that. Thank you very much, Chair, for indulging me.
Thank you, Councillor Liz. Do members have any questions? Councillor Cortez.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to Councillor Lillis for his excellent update then. My update is, or my question is slightly different. It's about the updated version that we got on CMIS of the report. I know myself and my colleague, Councillor Thomas, whenever you go into it on CMIS, it crashes. So we've only seen the older updated report. Is there anything that's particularly omitted from the first report or added to the second? It just freezes when you go on it. Yeah, so it just freezes. So it's just the original report.
Member, the report hasn't changed.
Right, so when we go into it and it says there's an updated one, it's just the same report, but it just causes it to crash. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. No further questions?
No, Councillor Bredding.
Oh, Councillor Bredding.
Right, okay, sorry. Thank you. First of all, I want to congratulate you on what is a very comprehensive report to come to us. And I do have just a few questions, and they're more generic than specific to items there. You're doing an awful lot of work to improve everything on the housing side for our residents. And, I'm sure they're very grateful to it. What, going forward, once some of these changes have been put into place, is going to be the plan to monitor and to ensure that the improvements carry on and are maintained? Will that form part? Because I think that's quite important.
Thank you, Councillor Breddon. I would say that the KPIs that we will be presented with both at Cabinet as portfolio holder and Scrutiny will certainly hold the department to account. A very comprehensive suite of KPIs are being developed or have been developed by this gentleman next to me, and I'm confident that they'll stand up to the scrutiny that you're referring to in ensuring that the improvements made are embedded within the service. And I would also just add that the Housing Improvement Board, which I chair, will not be stood down until such time as myself, my fellow board members, and indeed the regulator are happy that it can be stood down. And I would imagine, just thinking a little out the box, that some sort of housing board will emerge from that, and that sort of scrutiny would then continue. That's something that I would look for, whether the Chief Executive or Damien wishes to pick up on that point as well. Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Absolutely, I can give that assurance also. My expectation will be that, and the regulator is very clear, that sustainability into the future is a key assurance that they're looking for before they will release us from their supervision. My expectation is that when we get into what I would call a steady state, in other words, the work of the board has, in terms of implementing the improvement programme, has come to an end, that we would establish a subcommittee, a standing subcommittee of this committee that is focused entirely on housing. So there would be a new standing subcommittee of overview and scrutiny focused on housing.
Councillor Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank Councillor Lillis for his update as well, very informative. General question. Regarding ground floor work level, where our people or whoever we use go in to do the repairs and the jobs that need doing in people's properties, who's marking their homework? Who's signing it off? Will there be processes in place to make sure the job is done properly and to a very high standard, as our tenants should expect? And will there be consequences for failing to do the jobs properly? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. As luck would have it, the person sitting to my right is the ideal person to answer that question. With your consent, Steve.
The short answer is yes, everything is checked, and in terms of the penalties for contractor, unfortunately, the contracts that are in place at the moment don't allow that. When those contracts are re-procured, they will. So they will include asbestos to enable some kind of penalties in those, but the current contracts don't.
Can I just come back on that? When is the contractor review? Can I ask that?
When is the contract to be renewed?
To be reviewed, yes.
To be renewed, it's due to be that procurement. I'm currently working on a paper that's on the forward plan for council to agree a route to procure. The contracts need to be in place for the 1st of April to deliver works from the 1st of April.
Thank you very much.
I'm happy to expand on how those jobs are checked if you would like, now or in the future.
I would prefer it now as well.
Every single job that's completed by a main repairs contractor, we have full access into their repairs portal. The following day that they mark them as complete, my duty surveyor will check those jobs on their portal, and if they're not happy that there's enough photographic evidence, then they will visit site. If the job isn't satisfactory, they will speak to the planners and the supervisors to get those revisited. So they're checked every day.
Thank you very much.
Angela, did you want to come in?
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Members, if I could just, and Steve, perhaps you can assist if needed. The MCP Performance Handbook on page 5 sets out the KPIs. They are very high in terms of compliance, and Steve and his team rigorously ensure adherence to that, and are monitoring that on a very, very regular basis. What we are finding is that the pace and the volume of work that's happening is essentially driving real-time data, which means that Steve literally only has to pick up the phone to the relevant individuals to be able to get things done. The other thing I would say, and I think it would be helpful, Steve, is if you could describe the process by which we only visit once and we identify any other issues. Through you, Chair.
Certainly, when a resident reports a repair, if that comes through to MCP, they will go and visit and complete whatever the residents told them that needs doing. If the works relate that it's more than and a surveyor needs to visit, a surveyor will go and visit the property, do a full inspection on the property, listing all of the repairs that need doing, create a schedule of works, and then they're managed with my repairs manager and contractor to get all those done in as few visits as possible. The KPIs that are produced for the new ones that you can see in there, with the MLAP, the minimum level of acceptable performance, and the KPIs, they're kind of best practice, industry practice. It's not contractor marking their own homework. We have full access into their system. They complete the KPIs because it's quicker for them to do than me, but people in my team check those on a line by line and make sure the numbers are correct for those KPIs.
Thank you. Councillor Bredding. Sorry, Councillor Larman. I haven't got my glasses on.
Thank you, Chair. They're on your head. Just one question. In the appendage 1 and through the report, we obtained a downgrade. When will that be? Will we have a chance to have another review and actually intend to upgrade that?
If I can. So the regulator come by, they've looked at the information we had to supply, they've given us a rating. We now have the Housing Improvement Board, and as we start to feed new data in, they have said that they will advise at which point they want to come back and reassess. That might be 12 months, might be 18, but they certainly want to see the data set starting to come back, and then they will advise us from there.
So,
thank you.
So sorry, but we haven't really got a time scale that we're working to. We're just...
Yes, please.
Thank you, Chair. So following the C4 grading, we are under an enforcement process with the regulator. So we have, as Councillor Lillis has said, we have these regular monthly meetings with the regulator. We have to basically supply an awful lot of information to them. And then basically anything that goes to the board is almost sent on to the regulator as well. So it's a very open and transparent process from our perspective. You tell the regulator everything they want to know, you don't hold back. It's a continual process. It's very difficult to say on this date they will come back. Obviously, we're working at a pace which we hope they will see that pace, see those improvements, see that compliance with consumer standards is coming through, and they will start the process of saying, okay, we feel you're now a C3 or a C2 or whatever. Our objective is to get to C1, obviously. And you've got to remember, C1 is you've met the standards. It doesn't mean it's the highest standards. You've met the standards. That's our objective. And that comes back to the question earlier about the sustainment of this. That is so important. And when we set out in November 2024 and again in January this year, 2 reports to Cabinet for their approval, one to set up the HIP programme, the secondly to provide the funding. As part of that, it was always in our mind, how are we going to sustain this? And there's a big piece of work that's taking place at the moment, looking at what does the housing service of the future that can sustain that quality of performance forever. You know, this is not just a point in time, let's just fix the problem and walk away. This is how do we keep that performance going. So the regulator in their own time will be at the appropriate time, they will say, we're happy to say you have moved from C4 to C3 to C2 to C1, but that will be in their own time.
Thank you. Councillor Broding.
Thank you, Chair. At the end of the day, all of this work is in for the benefit of our residents. Do we have any indication whether or not they are feeling that things are progressing to the good for them? Because I think it's important through all the steps that we're taking that we keep them in mind and keep, hearing back from them. So may I ask, do we know how they're feeling about this?
Thank you. So as part of the engagement with tenants, engagement with tenants is one of the key tenets, if you like, of the regulator. So every year the council are required to carry out a series of questions with all of our residents that focus on all areas of their tenancy experience. And we've got the responses back for year 24-25. And in terms of how they're feeling, yes, it indicates that there are challenges there are frustrations there. Some of those in relation to the speed of complaint handling, some of those in relation to the repairs and maintenance and how quickly those things happen. Some of them in relation to issues that they've had with neighbours or antisocial behaviour issues. So we now have a basis about where our residents feel they are, and we're working with TPAS and Acuity, which is a surveying company. They assist with surveys, and TPAS in terms of tenant participation and engagement to try and basically, one, reshape the questions for the year ahead to make sure we're capturing more data and more feeling from the residents, because some of the questions were quite general and we want to get a bit more specific about what we're getting back from them. And then two, to make sure that we reach a wider range of residents. So that could be trying to contact them through telephone calls, through postcard surveys, through when we're on site, during one visit, we might finish the purpose of the visit and then say, oh, by the way, would you like to help us with completing this survey? So we're trying to use all these contact points to basically improve the interactions with the residents so that the following survey helps to capture more data and help to get a better reading from residents who will then hopefully start to be answering as we're going through change. So at the minute, we're answering almost with the old structures that we've got in place. Next year's data for us will be very, very interesting and important to make sure we're on the right track and doing what needs to be done.
Thank you. Councillor Coates.
Thanks, Chair. 2 parts of a question. Prior to this inspection and our current rating, was there any form of ratings before this, and what was our rating then? That's part 1.
Thank you. So there were previous regulations What I would say is the requirement to meet the regulations, the onus was more on self-referral. Funny enough, I've got it in the report. So on the 29th of February 2024, the regulator brought in new consumer standards, and there was a requirement to make sure certain things had to happen. So that regulatory oversight, if you like, was very much by self-referral, make sure you're hitting certain things. And obviously with the advent of the new consumer standards, it's very much directed. We want to see data, we want to see the TSM returns, we want to make sure that you're looking after your residents, and it's contained in the report, in my response, but there are very specific themes in relation to safety and quality neighbourhoods and so on. So hopefully that gives an answer.
Yeah, thank you. That's part one of the question. The second part to follow on. Why, if, for example, we had to do surveys every 5 years, didn't we? I mean, it seems a real simple thing.
Sorry, when you say service, I'm assuming you mean the tenant status.
Sorry, the
stock condition survey. So I might pass across to my colleague in a second, but certainly stock condition survey, that's more for planned maintenance. That's not, if you like, a specific. It's within the safety and quality standard, but essentially it's required so that we can know the condition of our stock, what type of repairs are needed doing, when they needed doing, whether they're fit for purpose. So that's the purpose of the stock condition survey. I'm assuming that's what you're specifically referring to when you say the 5 year.
Yes, it is. But it again, why weren't we?
I think the simple answer to that question is that piece of work just literally was failed to be done. There is no other answer that I'm aware of at that point, but obviously it's started to be stood up now, and obviously we've got a very quick delivery turnaround for that. Just in case there's any supplementary, I'm happy to hand across.
Thank you, Chair. So as part of the process and part of the discussions we're having with the regulator, it's ongoing, and this is core to everything we're doing. We had to undertake a root cause analysis, and this has been set out. It was set out in November last year. In the cabinet report, it was set out again in the January report. We met the regulator as a local authority. I was at the meeting for the first time in, I think it was April last year. When I say the first time, that's the first time they started the meeting saying, it's nice to meet Castle Point eventually. So I had become the director about 4 months earlier, and I knew at that meeting, the fact that this was the first time they'd ever met Castle Point or heard from Castle Point, I realised there was a problem. I think there has been an increase in the scrutiny from members, which has been a big driving force behind this, as well as the regulator coming in. So we have been very open, very transparent. We've apologised to our residents for the failings that were systemic. And we have set that out in writing, whether it be in cabinet reports and reports to the HIP board, but also in the newsletters that we've sent out to our tenants. So it is fair to say that, yes, that stock condition survey should have been done every 5 years. And we were in the process of starting the procurement process to get it done. Then the regulator came in. So we focused on what the regulator wanted, and then we very quickly, and I think they're due to be finished this October, we have very quickly put in place and procured a firm of consultants who are currently going out and visiting the premises at great speed, but also with the quality standards that's feeding directly into our new data system, our new compliance system, which is the way it should be done. So we've acted on these failings extremely quickly, and that will continue.
Thank you. Sorry, thank you. Councillor Brooks.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Is it Stephen? Stephen, I've got a question regarding the MCPs to report a problem or a complaint. When I've gone into it and it's asking for your postcode, I thought I'd give it a go, and it's coming up with enter a valid UK postcode. I just wondered if you can...
Stephen?
Sorry, to report a repair online through the MCP portal?
Yeah. gone into Castle Point, picked it up that way.
Is that a postcode for a property that is a council property?
No, it's my own property.
Then it won't allow you to.
So that's what the next question.
Yeah,
Is it because?
If it was that way round,
yeah.
then anyone could be spending my money, sorry, your money,
No,
to do
I
repairs
just,
in their properties.
I would expect it to say you're not a tenant or a Castle Point.
Yeah, the portal needs work. It's on my to-do list. So.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. So I just want to get back to the tenant survey that was just mentioned, and I'd like to go a little bit further than that. Do tenants, when they have work done on their properties, have the option, once that job is done, to offer their feedback immediately? And that does include the mannerisms of the people going into the house to do the work. Are they treated nicely, courteously, and things like that? Because we know what some builders can be like with their language, and some people won't like it. So it covers everything. Do they have that feedback option?
Stephen? Sorry, Stephen?
Yes, in multiple ways. So at the moment, any completed work that's completed by any of our term contractors, for whom we have a mobile phone number, they receive a text asking them to complete a survey that answers a series of questions. That is built into the MCP and SureServe KPIs that they have to hit a certain level of those satisfaction. It's automated, they can't amend it, they can't change it, they can't stop the text being sent to people who don't want to. So yes, it is recorded at the moment through our contractor. I see them every week, I see them every month. It's one of the KPIs that they produce every month. And if it's less than a certain score for the series of questions, then the RLO, the resident liaison officer for MCP, will ring that resident, or if it's for SureServe who do our heating, they will ring that resident and say, you've scored us low, we've got this wrong, what can we do to improve?
Very good, thanks.
That's only been in place very recently, and we, at the moment, if you've looked in the notice, in the newsletter, we've put it in there about it to try and drive residents to complete it, because it's a tool for me to use to improve performance with contractors.
Thank you, Stephen. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. Reading onwards from the part you're going through there, it's sort of the regulatory judgment. I find it really concerning that it says here that Castle Point Borough Council has been unable to provide evidence, has a domestic abuse policy in place. Has that been rectified?
I can. The policy, it's not been rectified yet. The policy has been complete in terms of its written. We are just finishing off some of the public consultation with stakeholders within the HIP board that was discussed, and there was a robust challenge about that, and that is something that I've taken away. So what I am doing, just to make sure that we have consulted as thoroughly as possible, is just making sure that thoroughly as possible engagement with partners have happened. After that, it will be going through for member decision. What I can give assurance on, though, is although the policy needs updating, the work behind it is still happening. So people aren't being, are not receiving a service because the policy, the paper isn't in place. They are still receiving that interaction. They're still receiving that assistance. But the policy is a key document. It does need to be in place. So appreciate that.
Go on then.
One more. When we get these things, can we have them maybe so they're that way? Because even the glasses, I can't read a word of that. It is so small. If I went to the optician, they'd probably tell me I needed cataracts done or something. Terrible.
Thank you.
Maybe better, yeah. Yeah.
Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. Ian, you mentioned earlier about the root cause analysis, and it's one of the, on the spreadsheet where we have a RAG rating. And although it's good to see that some aspects of the work stream are on track, or as far as I understand, a bit concerning where we have red RAG ratings on certain items, one of which is the root cause analysis, which you mentioned, and it's rated as red, December, and also another item which is under the transparency, influence and accountability, which is red for this month. Could you explain to us why that is the case, please?
The Chief Executive has indicated she'll be able to answer that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. So as the author of the root cause analysis, I can tell you that it remains red and will remain red until I am satisfied and the board is satisfied that we have identified the long-term sustainability position that will address those root causes. We've done a piece of work which maps some of the actions that are being undertaken under the HIP programme to these core underlying foundational reasons. But some of them are systemic and will take a long time. So these are not necessarily about fixing compliance. So the root causes are predominantly around the engagement of tenants as part of the solution, rather than so that they are done with and not done to. It's around the performance of our third-party contractors and and the way in which we embed accountability and risk as between our client-side arrangements and our third-party contractors. And you can see we've made great strides in that from the answers that Steve Cog has given you this evening. But that's only one part of that root cause analysis. We've also, one of the other grounds for the root cause analysis was our record keeping, which was patchy and paper-based. We're not yet in a position where we're moving over to a fully automated or a fully digital solution, but we are part of the way there. So that's why it continues to remain red. And in terms of the way in which the HIP programme and indeed the service continues to engage with members, residents, and is escalated through senior leadership, for example, is a rerouting of all that governance. So the Housing Improvement Programme board continues to operate, but until we're really clear again that the governance processes are working in terms of escalation, those KPIs are properly reported, that Cabinet and this committee are fully cited on all the issues, and that the governance linkages are in place to ensure that long-term sustainability, it will again continue to remain red. The fifth kind of limb of the root cause analysis was around training and development of staff, and that will include putting staff through formal accreditation and training. And again, once that is completed, then we will start to move that away from red. So these are big foundational challenges that are at the very heart of moving from crisis management into that steady state and long-term sustainability. So I'm quite satisfied that it will be one of the last reds to finally turn not red. And it will be with the full consent and endorsement of the programme board. So it's less about an action that needs to be completed. It's more around the fundamental measures of success.
You may.
Thank you. Just to come back on that one, obviously it's good to know that for us to hear that all these changes and steps are made and taken, and obviously to congratulate Councillor Lillis for just taking charge of the changes as well, and for the implementation of the HIP board. I think for us as Scrutiny, and from what you've said as well, we want to be sure that this isn't going to happen again. Definitely not on our watch. It's very disappointing that it has happened. And just to go back to something that my colleagues mentioned, really there should have been some sort of a penalty for where there has been failure, and not just to allow this to continue. Obviously training needs to be given, but we need to be sure that should training not be able to mitigate any future failures, that there will be penalties in place. I think my fellow members would agree with me. Can you give me this assurance, please? give us an assurance, please?
Yep, thank you, Councillor. So it's important to remember that this is not a single catastrophic failure. That the problems that the housing service is currently facing is the inevitable consequence of a gradual erosion of the component parts of good management and strong service delivery and legislative compliance. So it is a culmination of a lot of things over a very long period of time. So, for example, you don't just suddenly train people on sixpence. You have to build up that over a period of time. And when a council fails to invest in its staff and it fails to invest in its stock, this is when you get the kind of problems that we have now experienced. So you're absolutely right that this isn't about just putting on a quick fix or a bit of lip gloss. This is about fundamentally redesigning, redeveloping and regrounding the entire service, whilst still at the same time still continuing to deliver. So it is all things all together all at once, and so that is what the complexity of the programme and why it's sort of straight line programme from bad to good. So it will continue to kind of evolve and iterate until such time as the regulator is satisfied, and as I said earlier, that the HIP board is satisfied. So part of that is the key performance indicators, which are will be reported to quarterly to Cabinet and form now part of our new corporate scorecard and are aligned to the new corporate plan. As a result of the new corporate plan, there are now performance objectives for all members of the leadership team, which are cascaded downwards to all members of all members of staff across the organisation. So every member of staff will have a performance appraisal, which is linked to the overall corporate plan and delivery of the outcomes that are stated within that, of course, which is the HIP improvement. And then those individual performance appraisals will contain things like personal development plans, which relates to training, development, and other skills that are necessary to enable a member of staff to do their role. So we are embedding a new performance culture in relation to staff. We're embedding a new set of KPIs and performance culture in relation to our third-party contractors. We're improving the transparency and the reporting between frontline service delivery and member oversight and scrutiny. And through that, you should get the accountability that we need.
Councillor Lillis, did you like to come in there?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to pick up on one thing that Councillor Jones mentioned, things didn't go wrong overnight. You mentioned it was disappointing that it was on our watch. It's been unearthed, I would say, on our watch. But these failings, I would say, are years and years and years in the making. You could argue that it's good that it's happened on our watch because we'll, as an administration, we'll put it right. And I'm very much determined to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lillis. Councillor Cortez.
Thank you again, Chair. My question's in two parts again, if I could direct them, if you don't mind, to Damien. The magazine that goes out to the tenants, which I think is an excellent idea, anything that gets engagement, I'm assuming they're going to be quarterly, and are they done in-house by the housing team?
Thank you. They're not specifically done by the housing team, but there are lots of updates from the housing team. The comms team pull the whole thing together, but it's delivered in-house by the council.
Thank you. And the second part of it isn't the nicer part of the question. It makes it more disappointing when one of our largest projects that we're doing of Abbeyfields, we managed to send out to everyone with the wrong photo. We're not going to start sending out stuff about Hadley and Suffolk and things, are we?
So I can advise that that was an issue that was pointed out to me after it had been sent out. We will make sure that that sort of stuff doesn't happen again. Apologies.
And thank you, Chair. And if I would just like to repeat an apology to members and to the residents of Abbeyfield in Canvey. And we have written to them to make that apology, and a press release has been issued to make that apology public. I think it's fair to say that in proofreading the document, it went through multiple pairs of eyes, and the photographs were added at a later stage. So there was a focus, perhaps an over-focus on the wordage rather than on the overall presentation. So that is a lesson that has been well and truly learned.
Councillor Lillis, did you wish to come back there?
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Cortez. Just to encourage members, really, to please do read Your Housing magazine. I know there's a few sitting in pigeonholes, not telling any details, but please take it away and read it, because earlier on there was a question, I think, from Councillor Bredding about our engagement with tenants, and that's very much at the forefront of it, along with all the other schemes that Damien mentioned. And there's much good work and good message and so forth put in there. And I know for a fact they are read. This will amuse members somewhat, just to lighten the tone for a moment. I recently had a taxi ride, and the taxi driver turned around to me and said, "Your hair is a lot darker in the magazine." And I said to him, "Sorry? Is that housing magazine you sent out? Your pictures are more flattering than in person." Needless to say, I didn't tip him very much, but at least we know it's being read. And I also had occasion to speak to a young carer, whose details will obviously remain anonymous, who gave me very good feedback on the housing magazine. So, as I say, please do read it. Give us your feedback. If you can let us know where you think we can improve things, then always open to suggestions. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Lillis. Independent person, Dale Phillipson, please.
Thank you, Chair. I was taken with the extensive list of new strategies, plans and procedures that are outlined in the 5 work streams as part of the improvement plan, many of which seem to have milestone dates in the next couple of months. I'm interested in the approach to training and embedding this number of new policies in such a short period of time, and whether the board has undertaken any risk evaluation in terms of the consequences of training all of the staff and partners in such a short period of time on so many procedures. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, yes, there are an extensive number of housing policies, working instructions that need to be updated with relevant training delivered. What I would say is most of the policies are kind of bread and butter activities that need to be brought up to date with some slight legislative changes. The officers are probably doing 80% of that work, and so to train up in relation to the remaining 20% and embed that should be, in my opinion, quite a straightforward thing, and it's certainly been part of discussions with the housing policy lead as well, in terms of delivering a policy, agreeing a policy, and then bringing in training as and when needed. In relation to whether there's a formal training matrix and whether those things have been discussed at the Housing Improvement Board, we've talked about housing policies generally, we've talked about training generally. We haven't talked about a matrix, but a training schedule, if you like. So hopefully that gives an update.
Sorry, if I can just jump in there. A training matrix has been undertaken by HR colleagues working with housing. So it's identified the training needs of individual members of staff. So yes, in terms of the changes that Damien made reference to, a large chunk of those are sort of by exception. So there's a sort of minimal training. It's rather more updating. The other thing I would say is where we have got substantially new policies, particularly in the health and safety and the compliance field, that is where the HIP team of specialists is writing up the work as they go. So they are the trainers themselves. And as a consequence of that, they are leading in terms of subject matter expertise. So they are embedding the processes that they're actually putting in place.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Lillis.
Thank you, Chair. And just to give members some comfort, one of the policies that you'll see as green on the rag there is damp, mould and condensation, and something that I shared with the regulator last month. One of the things they're obviously keen on is that transition and embedding of things, and ensuring that best practice works. And I had reason on one of our PIP stalls to speak to a tenant. Another councillor put me in contact with her. She had issues with mould within her, or damp and mould within her property. And you'll be aware that we have a new reporting, dedicated email for dealing with such cases. Well, I can tell you, members, that I spoke to the tenant on the Saturday. I reported it over the weekend. On the morning, I think before 10 o'clock, I'd had confirmation back from the officer, obviously monitoring that dedicated email. I can confirm that a damp mould survey was carried out, and just looking at my little update here, again keeping everything very confidential, I can confirm that the works are booked in, which will involve some repairs to pointing at the property. So as and when these policies do come online and the procedures are written up, rest assured that they'll become part of our normal way of doing things, or proper way of doing things. And as I say, that's a real case example of something that I've tested and it worked for me. And I think I gave Steve credit for that in the meeting with the regulator. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Lillis. Councillor Breding.
Sorry, I want to go back to Councillor Jones's question that she made, and that was the statement: are we going to be have assurance that the contractors that are working on our behalf, if they do not produce what we require, that they're going to be held to financial or otherwise some sort of penalties? Thank you.
If I can ask Steve, would you be able to answer that question?
Currently, in the contracts we have with our contractors, there isn't the ability to do that. What I can hopefully reassure you is, before any invoice is paid, before any individual job is paid for, unless my surveyor that's on duty has said this has been complete to a satisfaction we're happy with, and then unless my commercial lead has reviewed that from a commercial perspective, we don't pay the invoice. So unfortunately, I can't penalise them anymore and say we're not giving you any more work. But from the KPIs my contractors are delivering at the moment, I would be reluctant to say the problem lies there, or lied there.
Yeah. Councillor Breding, you'd wish to come back?
Yes. In mainstream business practice, if you have a contractor who does not deliver the goods, in the contract you originally have with them, there are some sort of penalty clauses. Can we not impose penalty clauses in those contracts with some of these contractors to ensure that they are delivering the goods?
So, Councillor Breding, we can't do that after the event because the contracts were let, and they were let through a tender process. So we can't retrospectively go back and impose penalties. But at the point at which we re-procure, and you've heard already this evening that the repairs and maintenance contract is due to be re-procured in the not too distant future, and Steve is working on the specification for that, we will certainly look at the modern approach to performance enhancement and appraisal through that kind of commercial negotiation process. There is always a balance to be struck in terms of the commercial risks of imposing penalties, because otherwise, sometimes if the penalties are too swift or too strong rather, then what happens is the contractor simply prices in the risk of failure, and then the overall contract price is increased. So there will be a deftness around the commercial negotiation, which I'm fully confident that Steve and colleagues will be able to manage. But certainly we will be looking to ensure that there is a strong performance regime with accompanying KPIs and penalties where appropriate. I hope that gives you some assurance.
Thank you. Councillor Larman.
Obviously, with the procurement going in place to get a new contractor, how long are you going to give that? Because I do that as part of my living, and sometimes it can take up to a year to get a new service in place. Have we got that time, or would it be better to sort of like have a time span and say in the next 6 months, 9 months? Because it's all down to getting the tender written. I mean, is the new procurement document written what we actually want, or is it still in draft?
Thank you.
So, and Steve will have provided detail. When we renew contracts, we renew them in advance of the expiration date of the contract, and we build in sufficient time in the timescale to ensure that there is continuity of service to allow mobilisation between your incumbent contractor and any new provider, so that the chain of service line isn't broken. Sometimes contracts, depending on their complexity, can take up to a year to procure, but we've got a degree of rhythm now in relation to the specification that Steve is working on, and we're confident of the KPIs that we're looking for. There are a number of procurement routes that we can explore as a route to market, and that will be all part of the commercial strategy that will come to Cabinet in due course for sign-off.
Thank you.
In that, if we're unhappy with the contractor as it is, couldn't we, because they're in breach of their contract, could we not give them notice? There must be something in their old contract to say if they're not performing, then we can actually give notice before their expiry date.
Can I just be really clear? The contractors are not in breach. We are satisfied with the performance of the contractors. The KPIs that are in the report are significant and robust, and are as you've heard from Steve already this evening, are robustly managed from an intelligent client perspective. Our historic problems go back to our failure in the past to appropriately contract, manage our third-party providers, which were managed via our then management partner at South Essex Homes. So that relationship has come to an end, and the work has been repatriated back to in-house, which is why Steve and the team have been taking this on at pace since the beginning of April.
That makes it clear. Thank you.
Councillor Cortez.
Thank you, Chair. Can I defer to Councillor Thomas, his question before mine, because it's on this topic?
Councillor Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. I actually do have two questions, if I may. Right, first one is sorry. So when you're negotiating the new draft contract and that, can Scrutiny has eyes on it as well, please, when you've got your final draft, for a fresh pair of eyes across it?
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. That, of course, will be a matter for the portfolio holder.
Okay, and my second question, if I may, I want to just mention about tenancy agreements. I read one 5 years ago when I first started, which actually breaks down into two more questions. Are they regularly reviewed, the tenancy contracts? Have they been updated in the last 5 years? And my main concern is, yes, 99.9% of our tenants are very good tenants, but our housing stock, how do I phrase this? We do have some difficult tenants that cause a misery to other people around them, whether they be private house buyers or whatever. Is there a robust thing in place to deal with tenants breach of contract? And I do understand that sometimes as an authority we have to house people, duty of care. However, and it has been my stance, and I make no apologies for this, if we have a difficult tenant that is making other people's lives a misery, I'm quite happy to see them kicked out of that tenancy and put in bedsit land as our duty of care, because we're still putting a roof over their head. So I want to know if there's processes in place. Thank you, Chair.
Please.
Thank you, Chair. So, Councillor Thomas, you're absolutely right that some of our social housing tenants are among the most vulnerable members of our society, and sometimes in common with all social housing providers, and indeed even in private homeowners, you can't always choose your neighbours, and sometimes your neighbour doesn't perhaps behave in a way that you would like, and that will sometimes cause friction. The housing services team works really hard to try and balance out and mitigate, working with tenants to kind of mitigate that kind of impact, because ultimately the best option for everybody is to try and reconcile the situation rather than to immediately go to enforcement. So mediation is always our starting point. Where there are circumstances where a tenant is in breach of their tenancy agreement, there are legal recourses available, but this is a legal process. It needs to go to court. So we have to act through due process, otherwise any attempt to circumvent that or do that otherwise will be unlawful and therefore kind of a waste of public money, and ultimately would fail to achieve its objective. You're quite right that if we, in evicting a tenant, make them homeless, then they may fall a homelessness duty in respect of them, but that would be a separate assessment and would relate and depend upon the facts of the case. We routinely work with colleagues in Essex Police and in the Counter Fraud and Investigation team to deal with problem tenants for whom we need to gain possession of the property, for example, if it's being sublet or if it's being used for illegal purposes, for criminal activity. But those are actually the exception rather than the norm. And you're quite right, the vast majority of our tenants are very proud, and they've told us this, they're very proud to be in council housing. If you have any further questions, Damien can answer those, but that is the general response.
Yeah, I just want to update my comment. I was referring to the absolute extreme cases where the police are raiding properties all the time, and I know it's very, very small, minute minority, but it is extreme cases. That's all I was talking about. But thank you for your answer.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. Councillor Cortez, did you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chair. I won't be letting him go again first. Probably to be aimed at Angela, if I may. Obviously, we're looking at potentially 5 years' worth of repairs to be needed at once. When you're looking at the big 6 issues, including mould, there's a huge financial aspect that could all fall on us at once, if you like. How do we sit money-wise, budget-wise? Is the funds there to do everything as required, or are we looking at going into our reserves?
So that is an excellent question. The property repairs are dealt with as part of the housing revenue account and not our general fund. Housing revenue account is a whole different ballgame in public accounting terms. It is made up primarily of service charges and tenant rental income. And like oil and water, the HRA and the general fund are not allowed to touch or cross-contaminate in any way, shape or form. The HRA has a borrowing ability in relation to capital spend, but not in relation to revenue. So we have, in terms of the health and safety compliance, which Steve and his team have been working so diligently at, those are non-negotiable. Okay, they are required to make our homes safe and legal, and we will do what is necessary to make that happen. We are at the position now where our fire risk assessments have been completed, and we are looking at a schedule of programmed works to address those. And in terms of our other compliance, we're in pretty good shape. The cost of that, therefore, is currently being worked up in terms of understanding what that now looks like. And alongside that, we'll run the remedial works identified by the stock condition survey that will be completed in October. We've done a pilot survey of initial stock condition surveys to sort of proportionately measured so that we can try and model what we think that eventual cost will look like. But it's still only kind of high level at this stage, but we will continue to refine that model as we get further. What it does mean, however, is that we have to fundamentally re-baseline our housing revenue account and reproject the costs. Now, you might have noticed in the comprehensive spending review announced by the Chancellor 2 weeks ago that the housing rent situation has been pinned down for a long-term period in that medium term. So that gives us some certainty of projection in terms of what those rents will be. And don't forget, the vast majority of rents that are paid by our tenants are in fact paid via DWP. So it is money washing around the system. And then works that can be recovered through service charge, of course, will be recovered against service charge, particularly in relation to leaseholders, for example, who are obliged to, by virtue of their leases, to contribute to that. But I make no bones about it. This will cost many millions of pounds to put right, and we will have to find a way to make that happen. That will be a combination of borrowing, but it may also involve will inevitably involve a prioritisation of the works that need to be done. It will involve some extremely good procurement activity to get really competitive prices, and some excellent contract management to hold contractors within budget. We began this process not knowing what we know now. So we now do know, and we have a fairly good idea of where it's taking us. And so members will see reports coming forward over the course of the next few months to Cabinet which deal exactly with that point. It will not be easy, and it isn't a question of borrowing against the general fund because, as I say, we can't mix the funding streams, but it is going to provide us with a real financial challenge going forward.
Thank you. You want to come back, Councillor Cortez?
If I can, with a slight second point on that. Thank you for your answer, it was excellent. How do we sit with privately owned properties that are in a council building, say a council service block of flats? If we're the landlord, obviously for the private owner to have a mortgage, they've got to have adequate buildings insurance, which would be sorted by the landlord. Surely our insurance can't be very happy with the fact that we haven't had surveys done over that period and we could potentially have unknown risk that we're not aware of.
So I think there's two. Sorry, Chair, through you. I think there are 2 points there, Councillor Cortez. Number one is in relation to leaseholders. Leaseholders own their properties outright under a leasehold title with the council as the freehold owner. So they are the legal equivalent of a freehold owner in terms of they have a long lease, but they are, and therefore they don't pay rent to the council, but they are liable for their proportion of a service charge in relation to common areas. So if you are a leaseholder in a block scheme, for example, it will relate to things like common parts, hallways, foyers, corridors, roof, for example. We are required to account to our leaseholders and explain to them works that we've done, and they equally will demand from us a really high level of service because they're entitled to do so. So their buildings insurance will relate to their own property and therefore indemnify them in respect of the common parts, which are still owned by the council. Yes, because we still, but we will insure the whole block. But the individual leaseholders' buildings insurance, building and contents insurance, will relate to their bit of the property. Ours only relates to the common parts. So if there is a structural issue that relates to that individual unit, it relates just to that individual unit.
Sorry, not with flats. It doesn't. With flats, you end up with the freeholder being us, as in the council. they have to insure the building. You can't
yes.
get buildings insurance. You can get contents insurance, but you can't get buildings insurance on part of a building. You have to get it on all of it, which is why they pay the ground rent, the insurance, and the service charge to us separately. It would just worry me that, and I'm coming from someone who has a mortgage background. I've worked for a mortgage company for a number of years. We would be very sceptical about our risk when it came to lending when the conveyancing was going through, if the conveyancing turned up that we hadn't had adequate oversight of the building for, say, 5 years, and would our insurance particularly pay out, knowing that potentially we could have been negligible?
So just to clarify my point, the issue is if a leaseholder does something, for example, if there's a structural wall in a leaseholder's apartment and they damage it, there's the indemnity sits with the leaseholder. So there is an overall insurance position from the council as a freeholder, but there's a reciprocal indemnity arrangement that sits with the leaseholders. So that's the point that I was rather clumsily trying to make. In relation to the insurance position, so our insurers ask us to insure against our standard risks, which we do. And in terms of our stock condition survey, the fact that we are out of time of the recommended reporting cycle clearly has an impact, but has not to date proved an issue with our insurers.
Thank you. Councillor Jones, I'm sorry you had a long wait.
It's all right, thank you, Chair. If I could address my question to the CEO. You mentioned the stock condition survey. Could you tell me what proportion is suitable for disabled tenants? And not just the minimum Disability Act standard, please.
So off the top of my head, Councillor Jones, I'm not able to give you that information. It's something I can answer offline and I can give you that information separately and ask Steve to take that away as an action, please. Unless, of course, Steve, you can answer it now.
Please.
Could you clarify the question you're asking, please? Because a stock condition survey is a list of 100 and however many different questions around the asset. I'm not sure what your question relates to around disabled and disabilities, because every property we assess on its condition, that wouldn't, whether that was a disabled resident, person with additional needs or whatever, wouldn't make any difference to the questions we ask and the amount of stock condition surveys. Could you help me understand what you want me to try and answer, because I'm a little bit stuck at the moment?
Yes, what I mean is, of the list of properties that the council has in its stock for social housing, what percentage is suitable for disabled tenants?
Okay, I don't have that number. We can get you that number of those, but that won't be a quick answer because we don't know at the moment until we finish those stock condition surveys.
One thing I would say, Councillor Jones, is that in terms of, there's some nuance around the question. There may be units that are already disability accessible because, for example, they have level access or they have a wet room. It doesn't mean that other properties can't be modified or adapted to make them disability accessible, and that is part of the work that the housing team, housing options team does, and housing allocations, working with repairs and maintenance to understand what adaptations may be necessary to a property to meet a tenant's needs, either a tenant in situ or a tenant who's coming into the property at void.
Thank you. Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. With regard to the number of empty homes that we have in the borough, is it possible for the council to approach the homeowners of those properties for us to use as social housing?
So, Councillor Jones, I mentioned the HRA is different from the general fund. Under the empty homes policy, if you were to buy a property outright, it could only become part of social housing if it was purchased with HRA money. And of course, it would, after a while, become subject to right to buy. Consequently, if you are using the empty homes policy, which only allows you a temporary right of occupation, you could not use it for social housing. It could only be used for temporary accommodation, because temporary accommodation is funded from the general fund and not the HRA. And therefore, right to buy does not attract.
Thank you. Councillor Broding.
Going back to the finance questions that were asked earlier, I appreciate the HRA fund is separate from your general account. Is it possible to consider the HRA, when we do know the costs for this work that needs to be carried out, is it possible for the HRA to borrow the money on a loan basis from the reserves that we have?
Angela?
So thank you, Councillor Breding. As I mentioned earlier, the HRA is able to borrow for capital. It's subject to the same prudential borrowing rules as the general fund, so it's subject to affordability primarily and the cost of servicing the loan. The HRA business plan is usually over a 25 to 30 year period to amortise the cost of the works, particularly around the cost of the properties over that period of time. So it would be a question of prioritisation. In terms, you can't use it to borrow from reserves, because the reserves for the HRA are used for within the HRA. As a matter of public sector accounting, I'm not entirely sure of the legitimacy of lending from one side of the balance sheet effectively to the other. I would have to come back to you with that as a separate answer from the 151. But what I would say is that there would be no material benefit in doing that, because the general fund isn't written off across a 25-year business plan period. So the amortisation period for the HRA is significantly longer to cope with capital projects of that scale and nature.
Councillor Broding.
Yeah, sorry, coming back on that, although you said there's no material benefit, there may well be, because it could well be that the general fund could lend the money to the HRA at a slightly more beneficial rate than it's currently getting for the deposits it's got. So there may well be, and it may be well worth looking at going down that route. You may get a better rate than you would do going outside. That's what I'm saying.
So thank you, Councillor Breding. Funding from the HRA or indeed from the general fund would be via the Public Works Loan Board, so it would be exactly the same rate. And in terms of internal borrowing from one side of the council's budget to the other side, I don't believe, although I will have to confirm to you, I don't believe that we would be able to charge a rate which was incompatible with the prevailing commercial rate. Because otherwise you're subsidising essentially the housing stock with general fund, which is wider council tax funded.
Thank you. Councillor Cortez.
Thank you, Chair. Last one for me tonight, which you'll be all pleased to know. Just a quickie. On the tenants forum, how's take-up gone on it? How many champions have we got?
Thank you. So I think it's fair to say that, my apologies, through you, Chair. I think it's fair to say that take-up has been low. What I can say is TPAS, that helped us conduct that exercise, have completed the staffing element of it. They've completed a residence element of it. Out of the residents that they were able to contact that were keen, we've got 6. We want to use that obviously as a base to grow. of the 6 people that have engaged, 1 has shown particular interest, and we're in terms of becoming a tenant champion, and we're just looking at some of the governance procedures to try and bring that person in, and how do we get them into our forums to make sure that there's a context and a shape and some rules behind it. What I would say, just as a supplementary, is what you should expect to see in terms of green shoots of growing that whole resident engagement area is, 1, obviously those numbers growing in terms of direct engagement, but also residents forums setting up within specific areas. To give an example, if one of our sheltered schemes, for example, decides that they want to form a residents association, we would be trying to put one of our officers into that forum to hear their voice, to hear what they've got to say, to bring those actions and those feedback and that feedback back to the offices to then create that into actions for them. That's how that process should start off, as well as wider tenant engagement.
Councillor Cortez?
This doesn't count as a new one, this is a follow-on. Would it be useful to get us as councillors to maybe deal with or look at residents' associations within our own ward?
Yes, that's very good. Thank you for that. I will take that away.
Thank you. Right. Do members in chamber... Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully this is the last question. Again, if I may refer to our CEO with this question. You mentioned that KPIs are in place and will be in place. I would probably consider this as a rather nasty question, but we are scrutiny, so I will ask it. What are the consequences of KPIs not met by the housing team? And if those KPIs are repeatedly not met?
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So those KPIs will be reported in 2 forums. 1 through to Cabinet as part of the quarterly performance report. So will be addressed by Cabinet if there are consecutive failures or any areas of concern. Cabinet will ask for further and better particulars of that and for a follow-up. Similarly, the reports go to HIP Board, who will also oversee that, and I'm pretty sure that they will ask for the same levels of scrutiny. To the extent that measures can be traced back to or derived from the actions or inactions or activity of a particular element of service, then it would be a responsibility for the head of service, working in conjunction with the assistant director, to ensure that we understand why that is happening. My expectation is that because we're reporting KPIs, and if there is a drop in a KPI or consecutive failures to meet, or there isn't sufficient improvement in the trajectory that we would expect, that there would be accompanying, we wouldn't just give you the data and go, well, there it is. There would be an accompanying explanation of why that is, and remedial actions will have already been identified and put in place. And therefore it would be around assuring the success or the efficacy of those.
Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. So coming back to that one, if at some point where, let's be blunt, a particular officer has been shown to be really incompetent, will there be a particular consequence for his incompetence? Because in other organisations, that usually leads to sacking.
So when it comes to officer performance, and this is not just for the housing services, it's across the piece. There is a process. We have a policy that we must adhere to in relation to that. The setting of individual performance targets and appraisals and the conduct of those between a member of the staff and their manager is part of an annual review process. So we would look to identify opportunities to improve or put somebody on a personal development plan or a personal improvement plan to address any deficiencies in performance we identify during the normal course of business. if any individual, and again, I don't wish to focus this on individuals in the housing service, particularly because it applies to all employees across the business. If there is persistent failure, or if there are other issues arising as a result of the appraisal, then the managing performance policy of the council will be deployed, and the options in relation to that particular individual will flow from the application of that policy.
Thank you.
Yeah, could I just say that it's more of a statement that's very much the case in the
Councillor
real
Bowker.
world. Absolutely, when it regarding personal development planning, investment in training, regular reviews, but performance management ultimately in the case of failure, with the final sanction being saying you're either not good enough for the job or you're not doing the job. So long as that sanction is across the board and that structure is in place, I'm quite happy with that. That sounds like real world stuff to me.
Thank you, Councillor Bowker. That's exactly right. Managing performance is service blind, and so that it applies to all employees across the business. So managing performance is an incremental process. It takes place through the year. It's linked to performance appraisals and performance management, and carries a wide range of potential interventions. And worst case scenario, if somebody needs to be managed out of the business because of a capability issue, then then the policy certainly provides for that. But that is never our first port of call. That is always a last resort.
Thank you, Angela. Do members in chamber have any further questions? I have some questions, written questions from Jenny Beaumont, independent person. There is also reference in this newsletter to a new 6-week wellbeing programme. What is the take-up on this? Also, a second question is, can the committee be reassured that the tenant handbook and the newsletters are available in plain English and alternative formats? And her next question is, under risk implications, the risk of enforcement by the regulator is detonated as the biggest risk to HIP. It is stated that other risks are to be reported separately under corporate risk register. Is there a central risk register for all risk? Damien?
Thank you.
Okay. And Angela. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just to confirm, in relation to the first question, which asked about the number of people on the wellbeing programme, my apologies to members. I've asked for this information. I just need to verify it before I will share it, so if I can bring that one back. In relation to point 2, the tenant handbook, will newsletters be made available in plain English format? So the tenant handbook is one of the documents being updated by the housing policy lead. These templates, once they're in place, they can then be changed in relation to whatever the accessibility requirement is upon request. So we have those bits and pieces that we can do depending on what the needs are of the person contacting. In relation to point 3, yeah, we can have across.
So in relation to point 3, thank you, Chair. The question was around the escalation of the risk of intervention by the housing regulator as being recognised on the corporate risk register, and I can confirm that is the case. We're in the process of reviewing the corporate risk register to incorporate the new corporate plan outcomes and the key performance measures. So, but yes, that is therefore regularly reviewed by myself and the senior leadership team as part of our approach.
Thank you for those answers.
Can Ian, sorry.
Yeah. Ian?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to add to that, there are 3 risks that have been identified through the HIP programme that have now been escalated up to the corporate risk register. They relate to fire risk assessment, stock condition risk, and also the HRA, some of the issues that you've raised this evening, but they are now on the corporate risk register, so there is a mechanism in place to take them through the HIP board onto the corporate risk register.
Thank you. No further questions from members? Members, are the contents of the report noted? Thank you. Item 5. Update on the work of the Climate Policy and Scrutiny Subcommittee. Councillor Edwards has sent his apologies due to unforeseen circumstances. He is unable to attend tonight. He has, however, sent through an update which I will read out. The Climate Policy and Sorry, bear with me, I'm getting a bit dry now. The Climate Policy and Scrutiny Subcommittee met on the 16th of June 2025 and considered key items, each central to the borough's environmental and sustainability priorities. 1. Local Nature Recovery Strategy, LNRS. The subcommittee received an update of Essex County Council's final draft of the Local Nature Recovery Strategy. This is a strategy under the Environmental Act 2021, setting out priorities for biodiversity and nature recovery across Greater Essex. The subcommittee participated in the draft consultation process in September 2024, submitting a response in October 2024. They were pleased to see the several concerns previously raised, such as mapping limitations and the importance of biodiversity corridors in areas like Dawes Heath and Thundersley, had been addressed. The updated version features more detailed mapping, improved resolution and clarity, and marine habitat concerns around shipping are now acknowledged. Members still noted some shortfalls, particularly around South Benfleet and the lack of woodland plans in areas previously identified for reforestation. Overall, the subcommittee welcomed the changes and confirmed there were no grounds to object to the strategy's publication. 2. Castle Point Biodiversity Report. At the September 2024 meeting of the Climate Policy and Scrutiny Subcommittee, it was agreed to proceed with the preparation of a biodiversity report. The preparation of a biodiversity report is a requirement under Section 40 of the Natural Environment and Rural Communities Act. A specialist report was prepared recommending 5 areas of action. 1. Clear governance. 2. Development management policies. 3. Land management. 4. Process review. 5. Education. During the meeting, members proposed revisions to strengthen several of these actions, particularly to ensure clear accountability and to encourage other landowners, not just the council, to support biodiversity. This will be recommended to Cabinet on the 16th of July. 3. Climate Action Plan for Castle Point. Finally, the subcommittee considered a draft of the Climate Action Plan for Castle Point, which aims to guide local progress towards net zero by 2050, in line with Essex Climate Action Commission report's recommendations from 2021. The plan covers 6 core themes: land use and green infrastructure, energy, the built environment, transport, waste, and community engagement. Members raised concerns whether Castle Point was behind in some aspirations, as the council's as Essex Commission reported to suggested dates which were now passed. It was agreed that it would be endorsed as guidance. It was also noted that there were restrictions on what Castle Point could do, especially in relation to transport and water infrastructure. However, There were also changes which could be made locally. The Climate Action Commission report will also be recommended to the Cabinet on the 16th of July. Given the breadth and the importance of the draft action local plan, the subcommittee agreed that further time was needed to review it properly, and it was deferred to the next meeting, which took place last night, and a further meeting will take place in August to continue the discussions. I'd like to thank Councillor Edwards and his committee for all the work that they've been doing. It's been, I should imagine, it's been very hard. And if I can just go back a step, I should have thanked Councillor Lillis and all the officers for all the hard work that they're doing on the housing. I know it hasn't been easy, and there's still a lot to do, but I'm sure that we will get there. Thank you all. Right. Members, do you have any comments? Brading.
May I ask that any other updates on the climate committee could be submitted to us in writing in advance, because we haven't had a chance to actually absorb the information we've been given, and it would be useful to have that.
Councillor Brading, if I can come in there. It was only today that Councillor Edwards had to send his apologies due to a family emergency. So the reason you haven't had that is for that reason.
It can be circulated, and the meeting was last night.
Sorry?
And the meeting took place last night.
And the meeting only took place last night, but if you'd like that circulated, I'm sure we can do that.
Yes.
Thank you. That concludes that item. And the last item on the agenda is agenda item 6, work plan. Members, the updated work plan has been circulated. Since this was published, there have been a few changes. The quarterly housing improvement action plan will next come to this committee in November. The car park review will come to a later meeting, and the HMO's report is scheduled for September. Are there any further suggestions? Councillor Cortez.
Sorry, Chair. Thank you for answering. That was two of my questions about the work plan. At the weekend, on Sunday, I was at the excellent monthly classic car meet at the Paddocks. And whilst I was there, I was looking, and it was a beautiful sunny day, and we've got the wonderful facility, or the potentially wonderful facility of the splash park. Can we put that somewhere? Because it'd be a shame to get to another summer and that not have anything doing other than growing weeds.
Thank you. Angela?
Thank you, Councillor Cortez. I can advise you that that is being reviewed by the Asset Review Board at the moment. So that is with that particular forum for review, and once a decision has been made, it will come through the usual governance routes, which will be Cabinet in the first instance.
Anyone else have a suggestion? No? Councillor Thomas.
Just to come back via your chair to Angela, do we know when that review is going to take place and a timescale for that, please, regarding the splash park?
So Asset Review Board meets monthly. It's on their agenda, so I'm afraid I can't give you anything more than that. It's not within my gift to do so. It'll be a matter for the Asset Review Board to decide when it's ready to take the matter further to, in line with its terms of reference. It's a matter for the Asset Review Board to decide when it's ready to take matters to Cabinet.
Is that agreed, members? That concludes the business for this evening. Thank you all for your attendance. The meeting closed at 8:39. Thank you all, and thank you to our independent person. Thank you.